A Russian drone strike hit Ukraine's Sumy region just hours after the first direct talks in 3 years. The warring sides agreed to a prisoners exchange in those talks, but will it lead to a lasting ceasefire? And can the two sides narrow the gaps between them? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. It took 3 years to get officials from Ukraine and Russia in the same room, but President Vladimir Putin, who proposed the meeting, didn't go to Istanbul, and the talks ended in less than 90 minutes. The result? An agreement for a large-scale prisoner exchange, talks about their president's meeting, and both sides pushing their vision of a future ceasefire. Yet diplomacy isn't narrowing the great gap between Russia and Ukraine. So, is President Putin agreeing to further talks to avoid more sanctions? And with Russia steadily advancing on the battlefield, can President Zalensky afford to push for peace without further compromise? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Barbara Ngopa.
Just after the first direct talks between Russia and Ukraine in 3 years, a Russian drone strike hit a bus in Ukraine's northeastern region of Sumy. At least 9 people in the town of Bilopilia were killed, shortly after negotiators in Istanbul agreed to continue talking.
We agreed each country will present its vision for a possible future ceasefire, in detail, in writing. After we do this, we agree there is a point in continuing negotiations.
It's not clear how the strike will affect the peace efforts, but the Turkish-facilitated talks did achieve the largest prisoner swap to date since the war began.
We have agreed to exchange 1,000 persons to 1,000, and we're working on other modalities, and our colleagues are in contact and will exchange all the documents.
But Russia and Ukraine remain divided on conditions to end the war. For Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskky and his European allies, one condition is a temporary ceasefire before reaching a peaceful settlement. At a meeting in Albania, the European Commission chief Ursula von der Leyen announced more sanctions on Russia to draw Vladimir Putin to the negotiation table. That's after Putin missed the talks in Istanbul.
To be very clear again, we want peace. And so we are working on a next set of sanctions. Main elements of this package will be, for example, sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, further listing of vessels in the shadow fleet and lower the oil price cap, and more sanctions on Russia's financial sector, because we want peace and it is time to seriously engage on that.
The Kremlin now says a face-to-face meeting between President Putin and Ukrainian leader Zelensky could take place, but only if negotiators agree conditions and implement the prisoner exchange deal. US President Donald Trump says a meeting between him and Vladimir Putin is essential to yield results in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia returned the bodies of 909 Ukrainian soldiers killed during the war, one of the few areas of cooperation since Russia's invasion began in 2022. Barbara Ngopa for Inside Story.
Okay, let's now bring in our guest. Joining us from Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev, who is the Executive Director at Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Joining us from Moscow is Pavel Felgenhauer, an independent defense and Russian foreign policy analyst. And in Washington, D.C., Anatol Lievin, Director of the Eurasia Program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for your time. Anatol, so it seems like this was a small step forward for diplomacy, but no breakthrough was announced. Was that expected?
No, I don't think so. We have to see if Russia has modified its demands, some of which are completely unacceptable. And then we have to see if Ukraine will move towards them. But I think this is probably going to be a long process. Most peace processes are.
Peter, Russia presenting conditions, according to the Ukrainian sources, described as non-starters. From your end, what are you hearing about what these conditions are?
Well, I'm hearing that, Russia's appetites have actually grown now. And in addition to demanding that, Ukraine vacate the unoccupied parts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk, all of a sudden the Russian side is talking about potentially controlling Sumy and Kharkiv. And we saw what just happened in Sumy, this tragedy, 9 civilians dead. Putin has been building up for another offensive in the summer where he will hope to knock out Ukrainian troops in Sumy and Kharkiv, those two areas which he likewise considers by rights to belong to Russia. By all accounts, Vladimir Putin sent a signal that he is not really ready to talk any sort of talk other than strictly on the conditions of Ukraine's essential capitulation.
Pavel, but what's the starting point here? Russian officials have long argued that a settlement can be reached along the lines of what's known as the Istanbul communique that was outlined in 2022, which Ukraine flatly rejects. So is that the starting point, or is the starting point the U.S. proposal that was put forward last month?
Well, there's no need to second guess. The Russian position on Ukraine is rather fixed and official. It was announced by Vladimir Putin 11 months ago on June 15 last year. And it involves, yes, a recognition of Russian reunification, as it's called in Russia, the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Zaporozhye city and from Kherson city, maybe other things. And then Russia would agree that for this Ukrainian withdrawal, there could be a ceasefire. Basically, that position has not changed at all. That's the consensus position of the Russian bureaucracy of all. And that's how decisions are made in Russia through interdepartmental bureaucratic consensus building. And to change that position, you need to go again through the same process. That's not happening. Steve Witkoff's shuttle diplomacy was a nice attempt, but apparently it didn't shift the Russian position at all.
But let me just ask you this, because reports coming out of these talks, suggest that Russia demanded that Ukraine pull its troops out of all the Ukrainian regions claimed by Moscow before they would agree to a ceasefire. This, again, is according to what the Ukrainians are saying. But this demand goes beyond the terms of the draft peace deal that the U.S. even proposed last month. So why would the Russians be saying this now?
I say that's what Putin said last June. That is the Russian official position. It didn't change. To change the position, you have to go through a very cumbersome bureaucratic procedure inside Russia. Russia is not the United States. The Russian president doesn't have so much personal authority and capability to make decisions as does Donald Trump right now in the United States. So to get that united position of the entire Russian bureaucracy, again, you have to work it out. It already exists. There is the Russian position on Ukraine. There could be other. They actually said, apparently, the Russian delegation in Istanbul, that if you don't agree to withdraw from the 4 regions right now, there are going to be 5 regions next time. That Russia will continue its advance.
Right.
Well, that's how the Russian position right now is. Basically, Russia does not believe that Ukraine will survive. Ukraine is seen as a totally failed state in the final throes of its inevitable and imminent disintegration. And so actually and that's how Russia right now treats Ukraine. Again, that's not guesswork. That's the official position, officially
Anatol, let's bring you in.
Spoken by Russian officials.
Anatol, is the goalpost shifting? What's going on here?
I'm not sure, to be honest. The question is, would Russia give up its demand for the rest of these provinces if it got concessions in other areas, including from the United States? That's why the United States also has to be part of this process, because there are other aspects concerning the wider security architecture of Europe that only Russia only the United States can negotiate with Russia. So to get peace, there would have to be, peace without Russian victory, there will have to be a series of compromises, and a compromise in one area can perhaps lead to a compromise in another. But I fear that, undoubtedly, there are also voices in Moscow which are telling Putin that if you continue the war, Ukraine will collapse. And we're not sure who Putin is listening to.
Peter, what's the feeling in Ukraine? You're on the ground in Kyiv. What's the feeling in the sense of how much more war people can continue to take?
Yes, there's fatigue. I would be lying if I said that, Ukrainians are feeling the same way they were feeling like, say, the first summer of this war when Ukraine was on the counteroffensive and the mood was significantly more positive. Folks are tired, but at the same time, they know the alternative. The alternative is being sent to the gulag if you're still pro-Ukrainian, if you insist on speaking your own language, or otherwise having to go into exile and just leave Russia altogether somewhere in Western Europe. And Ukrainians do feel that is a certain trap that Putin is preparing for them in case he finally does sit down for real and negotiate with them for some sort of a temporary ceasefire. Once again, it will be temporary in order to allow the Russian side to rearm and to hit Ukraine again, because Ukraine remains the part and parcel of Putin's project of restoring the Soviet Union, not maybe literally, but in the spirit of things. Without Ukraine, that historical mission, as Putin sees it, is nil and void.
Pavel, the Kremlin keeps saying, and Putin himself keeps saying, that he wants to address the root causes of this conflict. What does that mean exactly?
Well, pro-Western Ukraine is seen as an existential threat to Russia, and should not end as a historical anomaly that should be corrected this way or that. They don't have to guess. On February 13, Sergei Naryshkin from the Putin's inner circle, the chief of the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service, he spoke in Moscow. A report was published in Interfax agency, and he said that Ukraine is disintegrating, it's inevitable, and right now, which Russia and the neighboring other countries should decide which parts of the Ukrainian heritage they will take over. What goes to Russia, what goes to Poland, what goes to Hungary, and that would be because Ukraine doesn't have a future. And he is the chief of the SVR in the decision-making process in Moscow. His opinion on the future of Ukraine cannot be actually overruled by practically anyone. So the Russian position is very clear right now. For it to change, a lot has to change on the battlefield. So something should change materially. Just simply having talks with low-level officials in Istanbul will not change anything. Even a summit, most likely, will not change anything.
So Anatol, does Russia have any incentive to rush into a ceasefire or any sort of peace or even compromise when it appears to be making gains on the battlefield?
Well, but the gains are very slow and with very heavy casualties. And people like Naryshkin are not the only voices in the Russian establishment. There are others who are saying this isn't worth it to go on and on and on, losing such numbers. And with very small advances, all you conquer is heaps of ruins if we can get a decent compromise on our wider issues, which of course do include Ukrainian neutrality, a measure of disarmament, things which are not acceptable to the Ukrainian side at present. But I think Pavel is right. Most probably, this will be decided on the battlefield, and we have to see how the war goes in the coming months. My sense is, if the Ukrainian side collapses, then of course, yes, Russia will press for maximal demands. But if the Ukrainians can go on falling back slowly, as they have been, inflicting heavy casualties in the process, then perhaps by the end of the year, the more moderate voices in Russia will say, once again, it's not worth going on for maximal victory. But everyone in Moscow is going to insist on certain things, and Ukrainian neutrality is undoubtedly one of them.
Anatol, just one more for you, because I just want to get sort of the perspective, the U.S. perspective here in Donald Trump, right? Because he predicted that there would be no progress until he and Putin were involved. So do you think that Putin would be more open to negotiating with Trump than with Zelensky?
Well, yes, I think he would. The question is, of course, what Trump will or can offer to him. Because the Russians, the West always talks about not being able to trust Russia. The Russians don't trust us an inch, because from their point of view, we have broken agreement after agreement. But if Trump can offer Putin a quite new relationship with the United States, in which the US, as Russia sees it, ends pressure on vital Russian interests in Europe, then perhaps, but only perhaps, Putin will be willing to reduce his demands on Ukraine.
Peter, what about the role of the Europeans here? I mean, the British Prime Minister said that the Russian position was, quote, clearly unacceptable, and that European leaders are closely aligning their responses. I mean, we know that Europe, of course, has formed this coalition of the willing. How is Kyiv looking at the role that Europe is playing? And do you think that the people there think that Europe is going far enough?
Kyiv is looking at Europe as the last hope. I mean, if Donald Trump decides to walk away from this war, as he has threatened, Europe will have to step up. And right now, we're just biding our time to see what they come up with. I mean, there's that, the issue of the $300 billion of Russian sovereign wealth fund that is sitting frozen in European banks largely, and some in the U.S. banks, which could be unfrozen to help Ukraine with its resistance and with, eventual rebuilding of the country. Europe can definitely do and should do more regarding allocating its military budget and actually amping up its production of weaponry that it should do. Europe should, that is a must, not just for Ukraine, but looking ahead.
How likely, though, is all of this, Peter? How likely, realistically and practically, how likely is all of this when many European countries are kind of dealing with their own domestic issues?
They have to understand that whatever outcome of this war in Ukraine, if Ukraine is allowed to fall, that will be its domestic problems. As far away from the Ukrainian borders as Portugal. Think about millions more Ukrainian refugees who will not be spilling over the borders to Russia, but most likely across to Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and on and on and on. It will exacerbate the welfare systems. It will bring to power more populist, rabid, neo-fascist parties to Europe, and Europe, as we know it, will cease to exist. I don't want to be, inflammatory, but I suspect that we can expect no less a shocking, result if, once again, if Ukraine is allowed to fall and the principle of non-violability of borders be destroyed once and for all.
Pavel, would you like to react to what Peter is saying?
Well, Russian position, as I say, is quite clear. There's a belief that the course is staying the course will bring eventual victory and some kind of sort. So yes, there's hope that Trump is going to deliver, if not something, maybe if he walks away, that's already good enough. Europe is divided. Having a really reestablishing relations with America under Trump. That's seen with a lot of skepticism because it's understood that right now there's a Republican administration that could go away soon in several years, and there'd be an anti-Russian administration in place. So Russia will be hoping that divisions within the West will eventually bring a Russian victory.
Pavel, is Russia just trying to buy itself time here?
A compromise.
Is it just trying to buy itself time here to sort of distract from the international pressure for a ceasefire and also to try to delay reported another round of European sanctions on it?
Well, right now, Russia believes that sanctions have basically failed. Russian economy and financial system are still working. Sanctions will not modify seriously the Russian political position, at least for the time being. And continuing this war for many years to come is not really also an option. So there's hope that there's going to be a rather quick resolution. Maybe Ukraine begins to disintegrate swiftly. That's what there's the belief. Russia mobilizes more forces. Russia is bigger. Russia will prevail. After 3 years of very bloody fighting, just agreeing on some kind of compromise, I don't think that right now the Kremlin or the Russian bureaucracy are ready for that.
Anatol, what does Washington do next, right? I mean, we got to this point because the Trump administration has been pushing for some sort of, talks to take place. They have taken place, but it seems like there's a stalemate. So what does Washington do next?
Well, I think Washington presses for direct talks between Trump and Putin in the hope that Trump can bring enough combination of pressure and incentives to get Putin to agree to a ceasefire, as the US has demanded, along the existing battle lines. But undoubtedly, as part of that, the Russians will demand that other conditions be fulfilled. And I'm not there are different voices in Moscow, and I believe there are different voices in Putin's own head. Because if Putin was really fixed on total victory, he would have launched, as the hardliners have been demanding for a long time, total mobilization and the conscription of millions of Russians, as the Ukrainians have tried to do. In fact, Putin is operating on the basis of a much smaller, voluntary, very well-paid army, because he doesn't, in fact, trust the support of the Russian people for mass mobilization. I'm sure he's been looking at the pictures that have come out of Ukraine, very unpopular pictures in Ukraine, of young Ukrainian men being arrested in the street and forced into military vans. He doesn't want to see pictures like that in Russia. So I think that the room for compromise is potentially there. But only if the US goes on playing a central role, and only if the US goes on supporting Ukraine with military aid and, above all, intelligence aid, which is something that the Europeans cannot do. Because if Trump walks away completely and ends aid to Ukraine, then obviously the Russians will aim at complete victory.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of military aid, Peter, what demands can Kyiv realistically continue to hold on to when military aid under Trump has dwindled compared to, when you compare it, of course, to the Biden administration and what they gave Ukraine?
Well, this is just connects to what I said earlier, and I think there's actually an elegant solution to that that would satisfy Donald Trump's "Make America Great" agenda, and we're already seeing the evidence of that. President Zelensky has offered to actually purchase, with actual real money, some of the Patriot systems that America has, and apparently 2 of these systems are now on the way. Once again, the $300 billion frozen U.S. dollars of Russian sovereign wealth fund that could actually be tapped into to continue supplying Ukraine. And Trump can go back to his voters and say, look, we're putting America's interests first. No longer any free lunch. Ukraine is paying for the weaponry we're giving it.
So, Peter, in your mind, where do you think things head to next?
I think we're going to come back to the drawing board eventually. I don't see, once again, the way it's been going, and maybe Pavel is better positioned as a military expert to comment on it. If Putin's summer campaign doesn't pan out as he sees fit, we'll be probably back to the drawing board in the fall, because pretty much all wars end in some sort of negotiations.
Pavel, and what about you? Where do you think things head to next? And I mean, Peter's saying it's back to the drawing board. Who's going to pressure the parties to go back to the drawing board?
Most likely the situation on the battlefield. Yes, we're going right now into the summer fighting season. Both sides will be hoping that they can achieve something of significance. If that fails and it's a continued bloody gridlock, yes, then maybe some kind of momentum may appear for some kind of ceasefire that no one really likes, but both sides feel compelled to accept. But I don't think that anything might, that sense may happen before the fall.
Anatol, look, you said that you believe that there is room for compromise, but in your mind, what is the biggest sticking point right now? Is there one that you can pinpoint?
There is the question of Ukrainian armament. What limits on Ukrainian arms Ukraine can accept, because Russia will certainly demand some of that. And there is the question of territory. Is Russia prepared to accept an armistice along the battle line, or will it go on demanding more territory in these 4 provinces? If Russia sticks to those 2 demands, then there can be no peace. But I mean, the fact that Russia has said that we need to base peace on the Istanbul talks and has sent the head of the Russian delegation at Istanbul back to Istanbul, I think are a positive sign, because although Istanbul didn't get to an agreement, it did get quite far towards an agreement by all accounts. And so I think the Russians are indicating that there is room for compromise, perhaps. But I fear that the war will have to go on for at least some time yet before that is possible.
Peter, over to you. And on this issue of ceding territory, what would it mean politically for Zelensky and the country if he did accept to cede territory, if he was forced into it?
That's another sort of landmine that is just, or a ticking bomb, to use that analogy. And Vladimir Putin is very well aware of it, that any sort of signing off on Ukrainian territory as now under Russian sovereignty would be tantamount to treason. It's actually enshrined in Ukraine's law. You would have to change that law at first. And we're still talking about creeping sort of annexation, creeping occupation, that Russia would not stop there. The more I think about it, the more takes shape in my mind is the analogy of the Vichy Republic, the Pétain's republic in France that was a puppet state controlled by the Germans, but nominally independent. That is something that Putin is very likely preparing for Ukraine, a landlocked country with all of the left bank of Ukraine lost, all the industrial areas lost to Russia, Odessa, basically, like I said, cut off from the sea, and nominally independent, but under Russia's control, while the rest of the country will be part of Russia proper under its constitution. So no matter what Putin has in mind for Ukraine, it ends up in a scenario where Ukraine ceases de facto to exist as an independent state.
We'll leave it there on that note. Thank you to my guests for joining us, Peter Zalmayev, Pavel Felgenhauer, and Anatol Lievin. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.